Guten Tag. Today I'm going to be talking about two things, so this is a video in two parts. The first thing I'm going to be talking about is this video I watched very recently titled There Are Only 3 Architectural Styles by TGTC Architecture and Urbanism. So, this channel claims to know a thing or two about architecture and urbanism, so I wanted to give it a watch and talk about it because architecture and urbanism are something I'm very interested in. Then, the second thing I want to talk about is why architects might like simplicity, might like this style, as opposed to styles that might be preferred by the majority of people outside of the profession. Because there does seem to be a bit of a rift between what is generally preferred by architecture students and architects in general, and the favored styles of the vast majority of people. So, I wanted to talk about that. So, starting off with this video, I decided to give it a watch. And actually, I originally didn't want to watch it because as soon as it came into my YouTube recommended, I knew it would be Tradslop in very chuddy but in a pretentious way, and I knew I would probably be very annoyed and I would dislike it, and it just kept coming into my inbox, into my recommended, and eventually I caved in and was like, alright, I'll give this a watch. And one thing which I've learned is that sometimes you really should be judging a book by its cover, because this video is awful. And first I'm going to summarize the whole video and tell you step by step why I thought this video was very stupid. So, starting off, this fellow makes the claim that basically architecture was invented with the Greeks and the Romans. Now this is dumb for many reasons. I'm not even going to use the term problematic because many people would say that. And a lot of people would be like, oh, this video is very Eurocentric. And I mean, yeah, it's true, but this video is stupid for more than just its Eurocentricity. So first of all, the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians and the Etruscans and the Persians were already making fantastic pieces of architecture. Before Rome even existed, before Plato and Aristotle were debating in the academy, there was already fantastic architecture in the Mediterranean and in the Middle East. And this guy wants to make the claim that the Greeks and the Romans invented architecture, which is ridiculous, because, well, for a million reasons, but architecture already existed, and in some ways you could argue that it was better than some of the things the Greeks and the Romans were doing, and a part of the reason is because the Greeks and the Romans were inspired by these other styles that they came into contact with. They borrowed from the styles of the Mesopotamians and the Egyptians and the Persians and the Etruscans and all these other groups of people that they were trading with and interacting with. They took styles from them, and then they were like, alright, let's build our temples the way these guys are doing it. And you can make the argument that some of these styles were more refined than the Greeks and the Romans. I wouldn't necessarily make that argument, but I do like these other styles of architecture, and to just completely ignore and trample on the genius behind these buildings is ridiculous. So I thought that was stupid, but then moving on, his next egregious claim is that of course, there was no new architecture for, I guess, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and then the Byzantines come along and they have their own new style of architecture, and that was the next architectural style. the second of three. There's only three architecture styles, and we're on the second one. It's the Byzantines. And of course, Byzantine architecture is pretty cool, but whatever. So he makes a claim that Islamic architecture and Russian and Eastern European Slavic architecture is pretty much nothing but a knockoff of this Byzantine style. Now, one of the reasons that this is completely stupid is because there's a lot of really awesome pieces of architecture and architectural styles that fit into the Byzantine styles and into the Islamic styles and into Russian styles, which have pretty much no relation to the Byzantines at all. And there are a lot of elements of Islamic architecture, especially, which have no relation to Byzantine architecture. Like, for example, in Islamic architecture, it was common to inscribe words in Arabic from perhaps a Quran on buildings. And that you don't see that in Byzantine architecture. That was not a thing. And a lot of elements of the Byzantines and the Islamic architecture styles were totally unique and different from each other. I do think his claim that Russian styles and Islamic styles, that they have traits are similar and that they were inspired by it, I think that is interesting. I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, how these styles of architecture derived a lot of inspiration from the Byzantines, but to assert that they are knockoffs and that they just didn't exist before the Byzantines, or that they only really became decent because of the Byzantines, is really also stupid. I'm going to use the term stupid and ridiculous a lot in this video because there's no other way to describe this video. And then, moving on, Rome has fallen, Western Roman Empire has fallen, and apparently for like 1,000 years, architecture hasn't happened. Which may be sure, because Romanesque architecture is maybe not that interesting, but he then asserts that the third and final architecture style is Gothic architecture. Sure, Gothic architecture is pretty cool, but that's his final one. That was invented in, it would have been around like what, 1200 AD. So yeah, we haven't invented anything new for almost 1,000 years, apparently. So that's his assertion, is that Gothic architecture is the final architecture style, which is also ridiculous because, well, he's leaving out all of Asia, all of the Americas, which had fantastic architecture styles. You cannot even make the assertion that the secret city in China is uninteresting or stupid. You cannot make that assertion. You cannot say that it is somehow worse than these other architecture styles, because it is a fantastic piece of architecture, and I'm not really seeing any elements of the only three architecture styles in that one. But that's his assertion, and then he ends the video there. He basically talks about how everything now just is stupid and sucks. And then, following this very egregious, terrible, pretentious, stupid video, he follows up with a second where he doubles down. And in this second video where he doubles down, he basically says, yeah, I meant what I said. And basically everything before, after, and in between these styles and outside of these styles is pre-architecture. It's not really architecture. It's like some stupid third thing which is below it. I think I've already asserted why that's dumb, which is that a lot of these styles which exist outside of Greco-Roman, Byzantine, and Gothic styles are awesome. They look awesome. You cannot even pretend that you have not that you can look at a piece of Chinese architecture and go, oh yeah, that's dumb. That's like something a subhuman idiot would make. That's so stupid. And there are other styles, like in Africa as well. I didn't talk about Africa yet, but Africa has some very cool architecture styles, which have no relation to anything that he mentioned in either of his videos. But yeah, so those are his opinions. They are stupid and they are pretentious, and I think they are ill informed. I think they come from a closed mind. I think they come from someone who just doesn't care to think or recognize anything outside of what he grew up thinking. And I find his tone throughout the video just disappointing and discouraging because he's just very dismissive. Oh, and of course, one final note I would like to add before I move on. His assertion on modern architecture is that it is slop. That's basically what he says, that it's slop. And anyone who knows me well probably knows that I am a big fan of modern architecture, especially brutalism, because I think there's a real sense of ingenuity there. Um, there's just a lot of creativity going on with all of the modernist architecture styles. When it comes to Art Nouveau, when it comes to Art Deco, when it comes to Brutalism, Bauhaus, other modernist forms, there was just a whole wealth of creativity in thinking outside the box or applying classical principles using modern materials. And none of these styles really fit neatly into any of these three categories. A lot of them you couldn't necessarily argue are a mix. He has made that argument that some are just a mix. Like, I think I recall him making the argument that Baroque architecture is just a mix of like Greco-Roman and Byzantine or something and just leveled to 100, which is a fair argument. I think that's a somewhat reasonable argument to make because Baroque architecture is like just a really exaggerated form of classical architecture. It's just very gold, very in your face, wow, flashy, like, oh, look at all these statues, look at how wealthy I am. Like, but to make the same assertion around like buildings in New York City is just so ridiculous. So, anyway, moving on, I would like to talk about why it is that a lot of people in the architectural profession seem to prefer these styles which kind of go outside of the traditional preferred styles. Like why would Le Corbusier? Why would he even exist? Why would his style of architecture exist? Why would these Art Deco guys decide to not just do Greco-Roman stuff? Why does Bauhaus exist? Why does Brutalism exist? And why do these styles keep going on and being circulated in spite of the fact that a lot of people who might not know as much about architecture seem to dislike them? And the simple reason is that these styles of architecture tend to focus more on the form. They focus on the form of the building. So they don't necessarily focus on all the extra details, and they focus on the architect and they focus on the architecture itself. They focus on the creativity of the architect and what the architect can do, as opposed to what the painter can do, as opposed to what the muralist can do, as opposed to what the sculptor could do, because a lot of these other styles are very heavy on ornamentation. They focus a lot on ornamentation and they focus on all these extra details as opposed to the raw building. And I think, in my opinion, one of the many, many reasons why architects might prefer these newer modernist forms, which seem kind of stripped of a lot of that ornamentation, which might seem uninteresting or ugly to the common person, is that it focuses on what the architect can do as opposed to what the engineer is doing, as opposed to what anyone else is doing. It's focusing entirely on the architect and the architecture. So when you look at a brutalist building, you can't say like, oh wow, the colors are awesome, the detail in the fresco is awesome, the statues are so cool, because that's what you would say if you're going into a traditional building. But when you look at a brutalist building, you're forced to focus on what the architect is doing. You're forced to focus on nothing but the building. That is why architects seem to prefer this style, in my opinion, because you are forced to look at it and go, huh, the shapes, the way that the architect was thinking about the shapes and gravity and how built and how like certain blocks can fit on each other and how concrete works. That's really interesting that the architect was focusing so much energy on that. So that's why I think architects seem to love simplistic styles, which they're not simplistic. But of course, the guy in this video would tell you that they are. He would tell you that it's like the return of tribal architecture, blah, blah, blah. And I think it's unfortunate that people can't find it in them to appreciate these styles, because I love them. I think they're great. I think they really stand out. I think they're memorable. I think they're fantastic. I think they have a real, they show a love for creativity as opposed to just copying what you might like, what feels comfortable. I think that's really cool. I think it's the ingenuity behind a lot of these modern, postmodern styles is very cool. And I don't know, I think it's very unfortunate that people can't find it in them to appreciate that style at all. I've had many conversations with people who have been like, yeah, I think brutalism is so stupid. And I'm like, well, actually, I think it's so cool. And they're like, what? What? And I don't know. It's just sad. But anyway, that's all I have to say. I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that I hope that you come away from this video thinking like, huh, maybe modernism is kind of cool. But I don't know. And if you already liked modernism, then hey, good on you. But anyway, that's all I have for today. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.